On September 19, 2025, radar stations across the Baltic registered 3 fast-moving contacts entering NATO airspace without clearance. They appeared suddenly, moved with precision, and crossed directly into Estonian airspace. For 12 minutes, the network of NATO sensors tracked them, silent, armed, and uncooperative. F-35s and JAS-39 Gripens were scrambled. Then, as quickly as they arrived, they were gone. What looked like a brief airspace violation was something else entirely. A live test of how far a major power can push the boundaries of NATO's response without firing a shot. The unidentified aircraft over the Gulf of Finland were soon identified as 3 Russian MiG-31 Foxhound interceptors operating at supersonic speed. The jets, flying from Russia's Karelia region with a stated destination of the Kaliningrad exclave, were operating in the dark. The transponders were switched off. They filed no flight plan, and they maintained absolute radio silence with Estonian air traffic control. The incursion occurred near Vaindloo Island, Estonia's northernmost point, a location of immense strategic significance due to its proximity to vital shipping lanes in the Gulf of Finland and its close proximity to the Russian mainland. For 12 minutes, an eternity in the context of supersonic flight, the armed jets penetrated up to 10 kilometers into NATO territory. This duration elevated the incident from a common border brush to a full-spectrum intelligence-gathering mission. It was a calculated test of the entire NATO response chain, from initial radar detection to the political authorization to launch, the scramble time of interceptor aircraft, and their rules of engagement. The response from the NATO Baltic air policing mission was swift. Italian Air Force F-35A Lightning II fighters, stationed at Amari Air Base in Estonia, were scrambled to intercept. The 5th-generation stealth jets made visual contact with the MiG-31s. According to Estonian officials, the Italian pilots attempted to establish standard radio communication, which the Russian pilots acknowledged but then deliberately ignored, before being escorted out of Estonian airspace. A web of regional defenses tracked the entire event. Finnish jets had monitored the MiGs before they entered Estonian airspace, and Swedish JAS-39 Gripen fighters picked them up after they exited, demonstrating a seamless multinational watch over the Baltic skies. Estonia's reaction was immediate and furious. Foreign Minister Margus Tsahkna considered the incursion a clear signal that this was a qualitative escalation and labeled it, quote, unprecedentedly brazen. The Russian Ministry of Defense issued a predictable and formulaic denial, claiming the jets were on, quote, a scheduled flight in strict accordance with international rules over neutral waters of the Baltic Sea. This narrative, contradicted by NATO radar and visual evidence, was not intended to be believed by the West, but rather to create ambiguity for other audiences and prolong the diplomatic process in a futile debate over facts. The 12-minute flight triggered a political firestorm that reverberated from Tallinn to Brussels and Washington. Refusing to let the incident be dismissed as a routine provocation, Estonian Prime Minister Kristen Michal immediately requested emergency consultations under Article 4 of the Washington Treaty, a clause that allows any member to convene the alliance when its, quote, territorial integrity, political independence, or security is threatened. It was a move charged with significance. This was the second time in just 2 weeks that Article 4 had been invoked, following Poland's request after a massive Russian drone swarm penetrated its airspace on September 9th and 10th. The back-to-back crises reportedly sparked a tense internal debate within NATO, with some officials, including Secretary General Mark Rutte, cautioning that frequent use of the mechanism for non-kinetic events risked diluting its political gravity. This exposed a large strategic dilemma for the alliance, which was how to respond forcefully to a pattern of aggression that was deliberately calibrated to fall just below the threshold of an armed attack. The North Atlantic Council, or NAC, NATO's heaviest political body, convened and issued an unequivocal condemnation. It denounced Russia's, quote, dangerous violation as part of a wider pattern of increasingly irresponsible Russian behavior. It also placed full responsibility on Moscow for actions that risk miscalculation and endanger lives. Crucially, NAC revealed that in response to the earlier Polish incident, it had already launched a new vigilance activity, Operation Eastern Sentry, to bolster NATO's posture along the entire eastern flank. The message was clear. these were not being treated as isolated incidents, but as a sustained campaign, requiring a permanent and enhanced military response. The condemnation was echoed across Western capitals. U.S. President Donald Trump warned the incursion could be big trouble, while the co-chairs of the Senate NATO Observer Group called it a deliberate test by Putin to, quote, probe for weakness. The European Union's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, herself a former Estonian prime minister, called it a, quote, extremely dangerous provocation. The European Commission announced it was fast-tracking a 19th sanctions package against Russia. At an emergency session of the UN Security Council, convened at Estonia's request, Foreign Minister Tsahkna held up declassified radar imagery, confronting the Russian delegation directly, quote, hard evidence is here. Please don't lie again. Russia's representative dismissed this charge as Russophobic hysteria before leaving the chamber, a gesture that only highlighted Moscow's diplomatic isolation. The Vindloo Island incursion was not a random act. It was the sharp, high-speed spear point of a broader, more complex campaign of military probing against NATO's eastern flank. To understand its whole meaning, it must be viewed in conjunction with the events that unfolded over Poland just 9 days earlier. On the night of September 9th through 10th, a swarm of up to 23 Russian decoy drones crossed into Polish airspace from Belarus. The unarmed drones, designed to mimic cruise missiles on radar, triggered a massive NATO response. Polish F-16s, Dutch F-35s, an Italian AWACS aircraft, and a Belgian tanker were all scrambled, while German-operated Patriot missile batteries went on high alert. In the ensuing hours, Dutch F-35 shot down several of the drones, the first time since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine that NATO forces had kinetically engaged and destroyed Russian military assets over Alliance territory. Viewed together, the Polish and Estonian incidents reveal a chillingly coherent military objective. The drone swarm was a test of NATO's ability to handle a low and slow, high-volume threat, designed to saturate low-altitude radar and force the expenditure of expensive missiles on cheap targets. The MiG-31 incursion was the opposite, a test of the Alliance's response to a high and fast, deep penetration strike by advanced interceptors. In the span of 10 days, Russia gathered a comprehensive intelligence data set on NATO's integrated air and missile defense system, testing its capabilities across the full spectrum of aerial threats. This is the modern face of Russian strategy, a persistent campaign of military and hybrid provocations designed to test NATO's thresholds, sow political division, and induce alert fatigue. Since 2014, Estonia has documented over 40 Russian airspace violations alone. These kinetic probes are accompanied by widespread GPS jamming across the Baltic and other forms of hybrid warfare. The goal is to keep the Alliance permanently off balance by operating in the gray zone between an Article 4 consultation and an Article 5 collective defense response, forcing difficult internal debates about where signaling ends and action begins. The provocations of September 2025 have irrevocably sharpened the confrontation between Russia and NATO, forcing the alliance to move from ad hoc reactions to a more durable and robust posture. The immediate outcome was the formal establishment of Operation Eastern Sentry, a permanent vigilance mission to bolster air defenses from the Baltic to the Black Sea. The incidents also lent new urgency to European plans to build a drone wall, a layered, integrated, and cost-effective air defense network capable of countering the full range of threats without bankrupting national treasuries from firing million-dollar missiles at $1,000 drones. The ultimate repercussion, however, is the stark realization that these incidents are not the prelude to a potential conflict, but rather a feature of a conflict that is already underway. As the chief of Britain's MI6, Richard Moore, stated on the very day of the Estonian incursion, there is, quote, absolutely no evidence that Vladimir Putin is interested in a negotiated peace in Ukraine that does not amount to capitulation. Russia is committed to a long-term confrontation with the West, and these military probes are a key component of that strategy. This leaves NATO and its members on a knife edge. The pressure to respond more forcefully is growing. Estonian and Polish officials have publicly warned that future violations could be met with kinetic force, raising the specter of a shoot-down and the risk of uncontrollable escalation. The 2015 downing of a Russian Su-24 by Turkey after a brief incursion demonstrated how quickly such an event can spiral into a major international crisis. possible outcomes are therefore fraught with danger. The alliance could settle into a new normal of ritualized confrontation, where Russian probes are met with professional intercepts and stern condemnations, a status quo both stable and deeply not. Or a miscalculation by a Russian pilot or split-second decision by a NATO commander could trigger a direct military clash between nuclear-armed powers. The Vindloo Island incident was a 12-minute airspace violation, but its repercussions will continue to define European security for years to come.